There have been thousands of civilian casualties and more than 1.7 million people have now fled Ukraine due to the war with Russia. To discuss this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Ukrainian President Zelensky says God will not forgive Russia as the shelling increases throughout Ukraine. Is there any end in sight to this war?
Doesn't look that way, Helen, very unfortunately. And the reason why is because Putin doesn't lose a battle. He doesn't lose a war. And it's not going the way he wanted. So he will have to carry this forward. Now, did he want this to escalate to where it has? I don't believe that's true. He didn't want this many casualties. He didn't want it to drag out. He actually thought this was a slam dunk. He thought this would be a very easy operation, that he would go in and the Ukrainians would be so vulnerable to Russian forces that it would be a very quick operation, and it hasn't been. And that's because of the resistance, and that's because of the lack of experience in the Russian military. That he didn't send in his best guys. He thought this was going to be so easy that he sent in his second or third tier guys, and again hoping that this would be such a quick turnaround that he would not have to expend the resources or his best resources. And for that reason, it continues, and the number of refugees is escalating, and the number of attacks and the number of cities that are being sieged and the property damage. It's just horrendous. And I'm sure we've all seen the footage coming out. And if there's one positive thing of being in modern times and in warfare, there should be no war. But when there is war, at least we have social media and we have citizen journalists that are keeping us abreast of what's going on. We're looking at the footage of families hiding in basements. I've been able to interview some of these families who are trying to just get out. All they need is a train or bus ticket to the border to get themselves out. And a lot of them are getting themselves to other parts of Europe. And it's just horrific. So we don't know when this will end. And I know for one thing that both sides do want it to end. Now, it's a matter of on whose terms it will come to an end.
You know, when it comes to warfare, I can understand if one country invades another to attack military installations. But why go after hospitals and apartment complexes with civilians? Is this to break the will of the Ukrainian people? What's going on here?
Yeah, well, it has done that, right? It has had that effect. Now, was this by design? I don't believe so. Again, I do believe that Vladimir Putin is a very calculated statesman. He is not this lunatic that people are describing him as. I think that is an incorrect way of depicting him, and it really dismisses or just takes away, distracts from the main story that he came in with a plan. He came in with a strategy, and it's not for it wasn't just randomly that he was aligning, over 100,000 of his soldiers on the border for such a long time to wait for that opportune moment to go in. Now, why he is hitting civilian areas, again, I think that this has gone very rogue. I think that this is not part of what the initial plan was, that it was going to be very targeted. But look, he is being met with a resistance that they did not calculate into their main equation. And for that reason, they will hit and try to go wherever they need to go. The Ukrainians are not as experienced. They don't have as much of the military might by any means. They don't have the equipment. They don't have the technology, but they know the way of the land and they know where to hide, where to come up on them. And if this is guerrilla war tactics, then, they are doing a great job at keeping the Russians back. But for that reason, the Russians on the ground there are escalating. And they're not just Russians, they're Chechens. And now we have reports that Russia is also recruiting Syrians to go fight. And the Syrians are, think about it, the Basiji fighters from Iran. They are, Palestinian fighters from Gaza. They're all sorts of, street rats that are going to go fight there. And they're not going to play by the rules. They're going to do whatever it takes to get ahead, particularly with all the setbacks that they're meeting on the ground there.
You know, there are reports that Ukrainian President Zelensky has been giving out weapons quite freely to whomever is willing to fight the Russians during the invasion. Apparently, some of those rifles, Lisa, have made their way into the hands of criminals who are allegedly now using those weapons on Ukrainians to rob them.
Right. I think, this is something that is expected. It's expected for many reasons. First of all, not all guys are good guys on the ground there. We have obviously the reports that are beautiful. You have old men and young children rolling up their sleeves to say, we want to fight in this war. We have women who are part of the fight. We have families that are part of the fight who say, we're not going to run out of here and escape and cower down. We're going to actually stand our ground. And we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to fight for our country, and showing a tremendous amount of patriotism. On the other hand, you have people that will always take advantage when they see an opportunity, and this is an opportunity. The same thing goes for when people want to give charity. Here in the West, we look at all these different websites. We don't, a lot of people have been emailing me, are these vetted? How can we trust people? There will always be people who take advantage. They will try to take the money, they will try to take the weapons, and in this case, there is no time to vet who's getting a weapon. If you have somebody who's saying, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and take a weapon in hand, you're going to give him a weapon and hope that he fights for his country and not hold that weapon against another fellow Ukrainian to get his wallet or his watch or whatever else they want to rob him for. But again, par for the course, these are the unfortunate side effects and the consequences to being in a war and having to, scrape together some sort of resistance, for his country. So I think the Ukrainian president is in a very tight bond, and he has no other way of going about this. But I think they're doing a great job of really holding their ground, and we pray for them. It's horrific what's going on.
The United States and European allies are exploring banning imports of Russian oil. That's according to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Now, Europe relies on Russia for crude oil and natural gas, Lisa, but has also become more open to banning more Russian products.
Well, that's what it's going to take, right? I think the crazy thing is that we've waited this long to do that. Shut it off. We have to shut them off. And that's the only way. Look, the sanctions it didn't matter. I mean, what is the connection between, sanctioning some rich Russian guy with a yacht in the middle of the sea, and then bringing in 670,000 barrels of oil daily? We're purchasing in the United States from Russia. So there has to be some sort of consequence that will really affect the Russians, really hit them in the pocket, and it's going to come down to energy because that's what we rely on them. In the same breath, we are pledging $10 million, another Ukrainian aid bill that is floating around among lawmakers this week to allow the Ukrainians to take matters into their own hands. But again, you have to connect the dots. There has to be a big plan here, and it will include both choking the Russians at home, stopping to buy, making ourselves energy independent, at least to the level that we don't rely on buying 670,000 barrels from them daily, and being able to give the Ukrainians assets so that they can, keep up this resistance. That's what it's going to take. And unfortunately, we've gotten to a place where we didn't want it to escalate to the point it has. We do not want to get involved militarily. We do not want this to escalate to World War III, as many people are saying. That's what it's going to take. That's the recipe for stopping all of this.
Has there been any talk by the Biden administration to potentially revisit Keystone XL? We've got the oil here. You don't have to buy Russian oil, Lisa, in the United States. We can help you as Canadians.
Right. Great question, Hal. And you know what? This is a very touchy subject and a very partisan subject here in the United States. If you remember, Joe Biden, the candidate, actually lost a lot of votes on this because he was not for the Keystone pipeline. A lot of families are affected, a lot of businesses are affected, a lot of states are affected. And why not be energy independent here in the West when it comes to working with our neighbor in Canada, when we can rely on our own energy assets, when we can lease out our own energy fields, and then relying on our enemy not only for oil but for refinement and everything else. I mean, it's a crazy equation to say we have the ability, but we are still going to rely on and support our enemies when it comes to bringing in oil and gas. So I think it's something that hasn't been touched yet. And this administration in particular, if you listen to the State of the Union, President Biden wants to make this Russia-Ukraine issue look like a bipartisan issue where everybody is united and we're going to show them. But let me tell you one other thing, Hal. It's not being reported widely in the mainstream media, but we're covering it on the foreign desk where we are asking Russia to help us broker the deal with the Iranian regime. And for that reason, over the weekend, there was talk of limiting sanctions on Russia in order to kind of give them a little breathing space in order for them to help us broker this deal with the Iranian regime. You can't make this stuff up, right? It's like a bad movie. In order for them to push forward this deal with the Iranian regime. Now, why would we want to not only remove sanctions from Russia, but remove sanctions from the world's worst terrorists and give them billions of dollars to go back on their terrorist sprees? Now, tell me why we're doing this here in the United States. So to answer your question, not only are we not using our own assets, we are helping others build up their assets. And we're talking about rogue nations like China, like North Korea, like the Iranian regime, and of course, Russia. So, I mean, that's, our state of affairs here in the United States in 2 minutes, but it's horrific what's happening. And I think we need to focus on our country, on our neighbors, and really fortifying the relationships we have with Canada and Mexico, and being energy independent here in the West.
Amen to that. Now, Lisa, the Biden administration says it is also looking at ways that it can help facilitate the supply of fighter jets to Ukraine. Tell me more about that, and do we know how many?
Yeah, this is an interesting deal that they've come up with. So Secretary of State Blinken went on all the Sunday shows to say, we are giving the green light to NATO nations to give jets to Ukraine. Now, the specific goal that has been actually flown around a lot is for Poland to give the fighter jets that they have. Now, these are Soviet era old Russian jets. They have an arsenal and they don't want to give up this arsenal of jets. But the deal was, well, if you give them to Ukraine, the United States will give you new ones. And now Poland is liking this idea, although there's opposition to this as well, and says, we're not trusting this deal. We don't want to give up our arsenal. But the deal would be for them to, and as you know, we have sent about 11,000 or so troops from the United States over to be stationed in Poland to await if there should be an escalation where the United States needs to send in, military assets into Ukraine to fight Russia. And there was already about 4,000 or 5,000 there. So we have about 16,000 troops already there. And now if we would give Poland these fighter jets, they would be able to pass along those to Ukraine. So this is a very important military alliance that we have with Poland right now to help us. They are our stop or our headquarters there close to this conflict. And of course, if they're willing to give up their jets, they're going to get an upgrade and get new jets in their arsenal. So we shall see. This is probably going to be about 24 jets. And Ukraine already has about 20. So it will be hopefully doubling their arsenal of jets and hopefully giving them that aerial advantage that they're looking for in this fight.
That's interesting that you say all of the thousands of troops, American troops that are stationed in Poland, waiting for things to escalate. I mean, what are they waiting for? There's a war going on right now in Ukraine, and the help is desperately needed. Why not send in the troops now?
Hal, it's a great question. And if we believe that the Russians would back down, then that would be something to risk. But when we think that, by sending in troops, it will absolutely escalate this to a place that we don't want it to. We know that Russia has already threatened the nuclear options on the table. We know that they have chemical weapons. We know that they will do whatever it takes. Now, should Russia, attack us, whether it's cyber or military first, then it would invoke NATO's Article 5, which would mean that an attack towards the United States would mean an attack towards NATO nations, and therefore the entire alliance would have to get involved. Again, this is all too complicated and too escalated for what Russia was hoping to accomplish. It is not in Putin's interest to launch a major large-scale state-endorsed cyber attack or military attack towards any NATO nation and escalate this to a place where they don't want it to. So I think that for now, we will stand back, we'll provide the assets to Ukraine and hope that they can, hold the Russian military back as long as they can. And through sanctions, through energy independence, through choking the Russians in the way that we can, hopefully it will deter Putin from going any further.
Now, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett spoke with both Russian President Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky about a potential ceasefire. Lisa, they had one already, but it was very short-lived.
Yes, there have been ceasefires they're not listening to anything. Vladimir Putin's pushing through, and he's not interested in a ceasefire. He's interested in results. He's interested in the bottom line here. And I actually, during the last ceasefire, during the time that they were meeting on the border to discuss the ceasefire, there's shelling going on. So it just gives you a perspective as to why this won't calm down, why this won't die down anytime soon. And for that reason, we want to keep it, again, to your previous question. That's why we want to keep it as a very targeted, isolated conflict, and not escalate this to a place where it is much more large scale, many more casualties. And of course, we know that even one casualty in this war has been too much because of the nature of this is the year 2022, and you're having, tanks roll into your city, and in modern urban areas where there are, very high population, high density population, and you want this to de-escalate as soon as possible. The goal is to get the Russians at the table, see what their bottom line is, and try to negotiate something sooner rather than later.
Now, we only have a couple of short minutes left here, Lisa. I wanted to chat with you about the People's Convoy, which has made its way to Washington from California, where you are. We have the Freedom Convoy here in Canada, which camped out in Ottawa for a number of weeks. Tell me more about this People's Convoy.
Yeah, talk about being eclipsed by the news cycle. A lot of people were looking towards this convoy as the message that was needed here in the United States, echoing the message that their brothers, the truckers in Canada, were able to do somewhat effectively. I think in terms of getting the message across that truckers have this ability to demonstrate through the optics of lining their trucks up across Canada, and now it's going to be across the United States to show that they are against mandates. This is also coinciding with the dropping of mandates. All of a sudden, overnight, if you saw it at the State of the Union, we had no masks on. Schools are dropping their mask mandates and hopefully soon dropping their vaccine mandates for children. So I think that it's a bit anticlimactic, unfortunately, but they were able to stop traffic and get into the DC Beltway a bit, which I'm glad for that, because they got at least some satisfaction of seeing their hard work and all of this planning come to some sort of climax in Washington. But it's what's really important is that these mandates are dropped and people get their freedom and liberty back, whether they're truckers or teachers or students or anyone else across the spectrum. We're hoping for peace, security, and liberty across the map, whether it's in Ukraine, the people of Russia, and of course here in Canada and the United States. So our message is the same across the board.
American correspondent, one of our regular contributors, Lisa Daftari, thanks again for joining us from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.